Claire Morgan sat quietly in her office as the city lights flickered beyond the tall windows. The world outside moved fast, but her own life often felt slow and heavy. She had been a strong and fearless woman once, a CEO who had built her company with sharp focus and endless energy. But after the accident that left her in a wheelchair, everything felt different. She had become closed off, guarded, and unwilling to let people too close. Her friend Mia had insisted she'd go on a blind date. At first, Claire had refused. The idea of sitting across from a stranger, pretending to be fine, pretending to be the woman she used to be, made her feel tired before it even began. But Mia had smiled and told her she deserved at least one night to feel normal. After days of hesitation, Claire finally agreed. Claire rolled in through the front door wearing a simple black dress that fit her figure neatly. She felt nervous. Her hands gripped the wheels of her chair, as if they could anchor her to the ground. She reminded herself to breathe. The waiter guided her to a small table near the corner where soft music played. She expected to see a tall man in a suit, someone polished, someone her friend thought might match her world. Instead, a man in a plain shirt and work boots walked in, brushing a bit of dust from his sleeves. He looked around until his eyes landed on her. Claire blinked, unsure if he was lost. The man gave a small smile, the kind that was unsure but honest, and stepped toward her. "Claire," he asked gently. Her eyes widened. This was not what she had pictured. He was no businessman. His hands looked rough, his face tanned from the sun. She nodded slowly, still uncertain. "Yes, and you are?" Ethan Cole," he said, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Claire studied him carefully. He was younger than she thought, but carried himself with a calm weight. She wondered if Mia had made a mistake. "You're not what I expected," Claire said honestly. Ethan gave a small laugh. "Same here. I thought I'd be meeting some lawyer type. My cousin set this up, said it would be good for me to get out of the garage once in a while." "The garage?" Claire asked. "I'm a mechanic," he said simply. The word mechanic hung in the air. Claire had never dated anyone outside of the corporate world. Men she had known in the past wore ties, spoke in numbers and deals, and lived through schedules. Ethan seemed to be the opposite of everything she thought she needed. Claire looked down, feeling a mix of emotions. A part of her wanted to end the night right there. But when she lifted her gaze again, Ethan was smiling at the menu like it was the most natural thing in the world. He did not look at her with pity, did not avoid her chair. He was just there. "What do you recommend?" Ethan asked the waiter with curiosity. His voice was warm, and he asked Claire if she'd been there before. She shook her head, a little surprised at how casual he was. As the meal began, she kept expecting him to make a mistake, to stare too long, or to slip into polite sympathy. But instead he asked her about books, music, and the little things that had nothing to do with her title or her chair. She found herself answering more than she planned to. At one point, Ethan told a short story about a customer who had tried to fix his car with duct tape. The way he told it, with hand gestures and a wide grin, made Claire laugh. The sound startled her. It had been so long since she had laughed without forcing it. The evening moved forward quietly, but with an ease she did not expect. Claire felt lighter than she had in months. Still, her guard was high. She reminded herself that this was one night, nothing more. When the meal ended, Ethan stood and helped her with her coat, not in a way that made her feel weak, but in a way that felt natural. He looked at her and said, "I'm glad I came tonight." Claire hesitated, her chest tight, but then nodded. "So am I." She had not planned on saying those words. Yet as Ethan walked her to her car, Claire realized something had shifted. The first time in years, she felt the faint glow of something she had thought she lost forever. Claire Morgan returned home late that evening, her mind unsettled. She wheeled herself through the quiet hallway of her apartment, the city humming faintly outside. She should have felt relief that the night was over. Yet something strange tugged at her. The way Ethan Cole had looked at her without hesitation or pity lingered in her thoughts. She hated surprises, but this one had left a mark she could not ignore. She tried to push it away by turning on the television and reading through her emails. Numbers, deadlines, and meetings usually consumed her attention, but tonight they seemed empty. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan grinning as he told that silly story about duct tape holding a car door in place. She caught herself smiling, then shook her head firmly, as if scolding her own heart. The next morning at her office, her assistant noticed a softer look on her face. Claire brushed off the comment, returning quickly to the stack of reports on her desk. She needed control. She needed to remember who she was. A CEO did not fall for a man she barely knew. A CEO did not let a mechanic break through her walls. But later that day, her phone buzzed. A simple text appeared. "Thank you for last night. You made me forget about the noise of the world for a while. I hope you're smiling today." Claire stared at the words, her fingers frozen above the screen. She wanted to ignore it. She wanted to remain untouchable. Yet her heart betrayed her and typed a reply. "I am working. But thank you." The messages stayed short at first. Simple exchanges about the weather, about a book Ethan was reading, about the long hours Claire spent in meetings. But little by little, those small words began to feel like a bridge. One evening, a week later, Ethan asked if he could stop by her apartment. She hesitated for a long time. Inviting someone into her private world felt risky. Still, a part of her wanted him to see. She finally agreed. When Ethan arrived, he carried a bag of takeout food and wore the same easy smile that had unsettled her the first night. He looked around the neat, spacious apartment without judgment. Claire noticed that his presence filled the room with something warm and alive. They sat at the table together. Claire moved carefully, aware of her chair, but Ethan treated her movements as natural. He never rushed her, never made her feel less. He asked about her accident only when she opened the subject herself. She told him briefly, her voice quiet, about the night her car had been struck and how her world had shifted forever. Ethan listened with steady eyes. He did not say he was sorry in the shallow way most people did. Instead, he nodded and said, "That must have taken a lot from you." But it didn't take everything. The words stunned her. No one had spoken to her like that before. She had heard sympathy and sorrow, but never recognition of her strength. She felt tears build in her eyes and turned her head quickly, but Ethan's silence gave her room to breathe. After dinner, he asked if she wanted to see the sky from the balcony. Claire laughed lightly, saying it was the same sky she always saw. Still, she wheeled herself outside and Ethan followed. The night was cool, the stars faint above the city glow. They stood together quietly. For the first time in years, Claire did not feel caged by her chair. She felt like a woman standing with a man who saw her for who she was. When Ethan left that night, Claire sat in her living room long after the door closed. Her mind fought to build barriers, reminding her that their worlds were too far apart. But her heart whispered differently. She had felt something rare, something gentle yet unshakable. She feared it, but she also longed for more. She did not know what would come next, but she knew this much. Ethan Cole had stepped into her guarded life and cracked it open without even trying. And now, no matter how hard she tried, she could not close it again. Ethan Cole could not shake the memory of Claire after that night on the balcony. He returned to his small garage the next morning, slipping into the rhythm of tools, grease, and engines. Yet while his hands worked on cars, his mind wandered back to the way Claire's eyes had softened when she looked at the stars. He had never met a woman like her. She carried both power and sorrow, yet behind the walls she built, he sensed someone who wanted to breathe again. The garage was quiet, except for the sound of clinking metal. His coworker joked about Ethan smiling more than usual, but Ethan brushed it off. He did not want to explain. To him, Claire was more than a story to tell. She was a secret worth protecting. Claire, on the other hand, tried to bury herself in her office work. The board of directors kept her busy with endless meetings, contracts, and plans. She looked sharp in every meeting, her words precise, and her voice steady. No one would guess that inside, she was distracted. No one would know that between reviewing reports, she caught herself checking her phone for Ethan's messages. They began calling each other in the evenings. At first, the conversations were short, about work and daily routines. But slowly, the words stretched into hours. Claire found herself laughing again, something she had thought was lost forever. Ethan shared stories from his small-town childhood, about fixing bicycles in his father's shed, about the first time he drove a broken truck down a dirt road. His stories were simple, yet they carried warmth that reminded her of a world outside of cold glass towers. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan invited her to visit his garage. Claire hesitated. She was not used to stepping into places outside her controlled circle. Still, curiosity won. She agreed and asked her driver to take her there. The garage smelled of oil, rubber, and metal. It was not glamorous, but it felt alive. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and greeted her with the same smile she had begun to wait for. He showed her around, pointing out old cars waiting for repair in the small office where he did paperwork. Claire looked around carefully. It was far from the polished world she was used to, yet something about this space felt honest. Ethan led her to the back where an old red car sat half-finished. Its paint was chipped, and its engine was in pieces. He told her it had belonged to a customer who could not afford to finish the work. Ethan was restoring it in his spare time. Claire asked, "Why do you spend time on it if it is not paying you back?" Ethan shrugged lightly. "Because some things are worth saving, even if the world thinks they are too broken." The words touched her more deeply than he knew. She felt as if he had spoken directly to her heart. Oh. She looked at the car, but in her mind she saw her own reflection, scarred yet still standing. They spent the afternoon together. Ethan explained how engines worked, breaking it down in simple ways, and Claire listened with surprising interest. For the first time in years, she felt like she was learning something new that had nothing to do with business charts or contracts. When it was time to leave, Ethan walked her to the door of the garage. He leaned against the frame, his eyes meeting hers with quiet steadiness. "I'm glad you came," he said. Claire nodded. "So am I." Her driver helped her into the car, and as she looked back through the window, she saw Ethan still standing there, watching her leave. Her heart tightened in a way she could not explain. She had built walls around herself for so long, but somehow, this man, with his rough hands and simple life, was slipping through the cracks. That night, Claire sat in her living room with the city lights flickering outside. She thought of Ethan's words about broken things being worth saving. For the first time in years, she wondered if maybe her own story was not finished yet. Maybe with him, it was only beginning. Claire Morgan began to allow Ethan into her world more than she ever thought possible. At first it was small things. She answered his calls more quickly. She smiled when she saw his name light up her phone. Then it became larger things. She invited him to her home again. Not just for dinner, but to spend time with her in the quiet hours of the evening. Ethan came with simple gifts. Never flashy, never too much. One night, he brought her a book he thought she might like. Another night, he arrived with fresh flowers, awkwardly admitting that he was not sure which ones were right, but hoped they would brighten her place. Claire could not remember the last time someone had brought her flowers without expecting something in return. She placed them in a vase by the window and kept looking at them while they talked. She let Ethan see her daily challenges. She showed him how she moved from her chair to the couch, how long it sometimes took to get ready in the morning, and how frustrating it could be when things slipped from her hands. She expected him to look away or to rush to help too quickly. Instead, Ethan simply stood by, patient, letting her do what she could, and offering help only when she asked. His respect for her independence made her feel stronger rather than weaker. One evening, as they shared a quiet meal together, Ethan finally asked about the accident in more detail. Claire hesitated, but then opened up, telling him about the night that had changed everything. She spoke of the sound of metal crushing, the flashing lights, and the weeks in the hospital when she learned she would never walk again. Her voice trembled, but she kept going, her eyes fixed on the table. When she finished, silence filled the room. Ethan reached across and placed his rough hand gently over hers. He did not say empty words. Instead, he looked at her with steady eyes and said, "You survived something most people could never imagine. You are still here." It says more than anything else. The simple truth in his words broke through her defenses. Tears welled in her eyes, and this time, she did not turn away. She let them fall while Ethan stayed beside her, not moving, not letting go. In that moment, she felt seen in a way she had not felt in years. In return, Ethan began to share pieces of his own life. He told her about his father, who had worked long hours at the same garage before passing it down to him. He spoke about the struggle of keeping the business alive, how he sometimes worried about bills, and how people often looked down on him for being just a mechanic. Claire listened closely, realizing that behind his calm smile was a man who carried his own battles. Their bond grew stronger with every story shared. Claire found herself looking forward to the sound of his laughter. She enjoyed how he teased her gently about working too much, and how he encouraged her to take breaks. Ethan reminded her of things she had forgotten, like the joy of simple music. the peace of a quiet walk by the river, and the beauty of watching the sunset without thinking about deadlines. Still, doubt lingered in Claire's mind. Late at night, when Ethan was not there, she wondered if their worlds could truly fit together. She was a CEO, living in a tower of glass and steel, surrounded by people who judged her for every choice. He was a mechanic, living in a small home above his garage, fixing engines with his bare hands. Could something real grow between them, or was it only a fragile dream? But each time she saw him again, the doubts seemed to fade. His presence grounded her. A steady voice reminded her that life was not just about control and power. It was about connection, about the courage to let someone see the truth inside. On one quiet night, Claire found herself whispering words she had not spoken in years. "You make me feel like I can breathe again." Ethan's answer was soft but sure. "Then keep breathing. I'll be right here." Claire closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her heart. For the first time, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone. For a while, Claire Morgan believed she had found peace. Ethan Cole had given her something no one else had been able to give her since the accident. He gave her honesty, laughter, and quiet strength. Every time they were together, she felt lighter, as if the weight she carried for so long was no longer only hers to bear. But outside their small world, whispers began to grow louder. The first sign came at the office. One morning during a board meeting, a senior member made a passing comment about Claire's new companion. The words were coated with politeness, but filled with judgment. Claire kept her face calm, but her stomach tightened. She knew what they were thinking. A CEO, wealthy and powerful, should not be seen with a man who fixed cars for a living. Later that day, her assistant quietly asked her if the rumors were true. Claire only said that her personal life was not a subject for office talk. Still, the look in the assistant's eyes carried more than curiosity. It carried doubt. Claire felt the sting of being judged not for her work, but for her choices of the heart. The whispers followed her outside the office too. At a charity event, two women standing near the entrance whispered loudly enough for Claire to hear. They wondered why someone like her would settle for someone beneath her. Claire's hands gripped the wheels of her chair tightly, but she said nothing. She moved forward with a polite smile, but inside she burned with anger and shame. Ethan noticed the change in her mood. He asked her one evening why she seemed quieter than usual. She shook her head and told him it was nothing, but he looked at her with eyes that saw too much. Finally, she admitted the truth. She told him about the board members, the gossip, and the way people were questioning her choices. Ethan listened in silence, his jaw tight. When she finished, he let out a slow breath. "I knew this might happen," he said softly. "Your world is different from mine. People will talk." Claire felt her heart ache at his calm tone. "So what are we supposed to do? Pretend we are not together? Pretend you are not the only person who makes me feel alive again?" Ethan shook his head. "No, never pretend. But I don't want to be the reason your reputation is torn apart. You worked so hard for everything you have. If people think I am holding you back, maybe it's better if I step away." The words cut through her like a knife. She had feared this moment. She had feared that the pressure of the world would pull them apart. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Don't say that. You are not holding me back. You are the only thing keeping me standing." But doubt had already taken root. That night when Ethan left her apartment, Claire sat alone in the silence. Her chest felt heavy, her hands trembling on the wheels of her chair. She thought about the way people looked at them, the way they spoke when they thought she could not hear. The fear of losing her place, her image, her hard-built respect began to cloud her heart. For the next few days, she avoided Ethan. She buried herself in work again, answering his calls less and replying to his messages with short words. Ethan did not push her. He seemed to understand what was happening, even without her saying it. His silence hurt her more than the gossip ever could. One evening, she found herself staring at the city lights through her window, tears in her eyes. She remembered the night Ethan had taken her to the garage, the way he had said that broken things were still worth saving. She wondered if their love was one of those broken things. She wondered if she had the strength to fight for it. Ethan, miles away in his garage, stayed late working on the old red car. His hands were covered in grease, his back sore, but his mind was on Claire, He wanted to fight for her, but he also respected her enough to give her space. Still, he whispered to himself that he would not give up. Not yet. In the quiet of that night, both of them sat apart, hearts heavy, wondering if the world around them would crush what they had found. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but both felt the storm was only just beginning. Ethan Cole spent the next week working late nights in his garage. He poured his energy into the old red car, the one he had been slowly restoring in his spare time. His coworkers teased him about staying past midnight, but he only smiled and kept working. Each bolt tightened, and each layer of paint brushed onto the surface carried a piece of his heart. For Ethan, this car was more than metal and wheels. It was a message he hoped Claire Morgan would understand one day. Claire tried to return to her old routine. Meetings, contracts, and endless calls filled her days. On the outside, she looked the same as always, sharp and in control. But inside, her heart was restless. She missed Ethan more than she wanted to admit. She missed his steady voice, his laughter, and the way he looked at her as if she was more than her chair, more than her title, more than her scars. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence of her apartment felt heavier than ever. She remembered the warmth of Ethan's presence, the way he made the air lighter, the way he stood beside her balcony without saying much, but making her feel understood. All she had was emptiness, and it frightened her. One evening, after a long meeting, she decided to take a drive through the city. Her driver asked if she wanted to head home, but she told him to keep going. She did not know where she wanted to be, but she knew she could not sit alone in her apartment again. Without planning it, her car stopped in front of Ethan's garage. The lights inside were still on. She hesitated, her heart racing, then asked her driver to wait as she wheeled herself inside. The smell of oil and paint filled the air. Ethan was bent over the red car, his hands black with grease, his shirt damp with sweat. He looked up, surprised, as Claire entered. "Claire," he said softly, wiping his hands on a rag. She looked at him, then at the car, and it was nearly finished. The dull shell now glowing with fresh red paint, the chrome polished until it shone. She moved closer, her eyes wide. "You did all this?" Ethan nodded. "I wanted to finish it. It reminded me of you." She frowned slightly. "Of me? Yes," he said, his voice steady. "Everyone saw this car as broken, too far gone. But I saw something worth saving, something still strong underneath, just like you. And I wanted you to see that no matter what the world says, you are not broken. You are alive. You are still everything." The words struck her deeper than anything she had ever heard. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She turned her face away, but Ethan stepped closer. He did not touch her until she looked back at him. When she did, his eyes held nothing but truth. "I know people talk," Ethan said. "I know they think we do not belong together, but I do not care what they say. I care about you. I want to stand beside you even if the whole world whispers." Claire's hand shook on her chair. For days she had told herself to stay away, to protect her image, to keep her world safe. But none of that mattered in this moment. All that mattered was the man standing before her, covered in grease, looking at her like she was whole. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that being with you would take everything I worked for. Afraid people would see me as weak. But when I pushed you away, I felt weaker than ever. I cannot live like that anymore." Ethan's hand reached for hers. This time she did not pull away. Her fingers locked together, rough skin against soft skin, and for the first time, Claire felt the storm inside her quiet. They stood beside the red car in silence, hearts speaking louder than words. The world outside might never understand, but inside that small garage, nothing else mattered. That night, as Claire left the garage with Ethan walking beside her, she realized the truth she had tried to deny. She did not need to be perfect. She did not need to please everyone. She only needed to choose love, and she had already found it. The days after their reunion felt different for both Claire Morgan and Ethan Cole. Something had shifted inside them the night she saw the red car finished in his garage. It was no longer about doubts or fears, it was about choice. They had chosen each other, and that choice made the world around them feel less heavy. Claire invited Ethan to join her for lunch at her office one afternoon. It was the first time she had allowed anyone from outside her business circle to step into that polished world. Her staff watched curiously as the mechanic walked through the glass doors, his hands clean, but his clothes simple. Some whispered, some raised eyebrows, but Claire ignored them. When she introduced Ethan as her guest, her voice was calm and steady. She was not ashamed. They sat in her office, sharing sandwiches Ethan had picked up from a small shop. Claire laughed when he unwrapped his food and offered her half. It felt strange and yet freeing to eat something so simple in a room where expensive meals were usually delivered on silver trays. Ethan looked around the office with interest, but not all. He respected her world without letting it intimidate him, and that balance made her admire him even more. That evening, Ethan asked Claire if she wanted to take a short drive. She hesitated at first, but agreed. He helped her settle into the passenger seat of the red car he had finished. The seat was soft, the engine hummed smoothly, and the glow of the dashboard lights felt warm. As they drove through the quiet streets, the wind brushing against the windows, Claire felt a freedom she had not felt since before her accident. For years, she had associated cars with loss and pain. Now, sitting beside Ethan in the car he had restored with his own hands, she felt safe again. She turned her head and looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road, but the small smile on his lips told her he knew what she was feeling. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan glanced at her, his voice steady. "For what?" "For giving me this," she said. "For reminding me that my life is not over." Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers warm around hers. "Your life was never over, Claire. It was waiting for someone to remind you that you still have the right to live it." Her chest tightened, but this time it was not from fear, it was from hope. She looked at him and knew that he was the one person who saw her not as a CEO, not as a woman in a chair, but simply as Claire. That truth wrapped around her heart like a string, invisible yet unbreakable. They drove to a quiet hill just outside the city where the lights of the skyline glittered below. Ethan parked the car and they sat in silence for a while, taking in the view. The night was calm and the stars above seemed to shine just for them. Claire turned to him and said softly, "I used to think no one would ever love me again. I thought my accident had taken that away. But you walked into my life when I least expected it. You reminded me how to smile." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "And you reminded me that love is not about what the world thinks. It is about what the heart knows." "My heart knows you." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not from sorrow. They were from the deep joy of finally being seen, finally being loved without condition. She leaned closer, and Ethan met her halfway. Their kiss was gentle, steady, and filled with the promise of a new beginning. When they pulled back, Claire laughed softly, the sound light and free. For the first time in years, she felt whole, not because her life was perfect, but because she had found someone who accepted every broken piece and saw beauty in them. As the night deepened, they sat together in the red car, their fingers still entwined. The world around them could whisper and judge all it wanted. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the bond they shared, a bond that felt like two souls tied together by a string. Claire looked out at the city lights one last time before resting her head against Ethan's shoulder. She no longer felt trapped by her past. She no longer feared the future. She had found love again, and it was real. It was hers.